Arrogantly, I thought it would be really easy, and I thought, oh wow, I'll get a job really fast, and it wasn't that easy. And then that's when I thought to myself, okay, I need to change tact here. The look-see visit very quickly had to turn into okay, I need to get ready to move. That for me was my first real shocker. The reality kind of kicked in because I was like, oh, okay, what does this mean? I've already resigned. He wants a complete change of lifestyle.
Welcome to our subscribers and viewers, and a special thank you to Casandra Cronje, CC, aka Cool Cat. You've always been really, really cool and calm under a lot of stressful situations, and I'd really appreciate that you give us your immigrant journey and tell us a bit more about your immigrant story on the Immigrant Podcast. So I might just say that we went back as far as 2017 when we first chatted, and that's quite a long time ago. Maybe take us through from your decision to move to New Zealand and what your actions were after that.
Yeah, thanks, Dom, and thanks for the opportunity to be involved in this. So my partner and I had considered a couple of options. Australia was one of them, and we'd done a bit of research into Australia, and New Zealand was the other. And I think the tipping point for us was just that we had family in New Zealand who'd actually also lived in Australia for a number of years and then immigrated from Australia to New Zealand. And just discussing the options with my sister-in-law, she'd kind of given us the pros and cons of both countries. And we kind of settled on we want to take a chance and a stab at immigrating to New Zealand. So my brother, who'd actually worked with you, and he said, I know this awesome woman. She's really clued up. Why don't you have a chat to her and see what the options are and whether you guys qualify or not? Once we met with you and got the ball rolling and kind of got some advice and guidance from you on what we needed to do to get set up, that's when the whole journey sort of kicked off. And I think arrogantly, I thought it would be really easy. And I thought, oh, wow, I'll get a job really fast. And it wasn't that easy. A lot of companies were quite keen, and I had a couple of interviews, but at the end, it was kind of, I think it probably took 12 months of back and forth interviews and sending out resumes, and I still hadn't had an offer. So that was, I was quite disappointed that it was taking so long. I think I kind of went into it thinking it would be a really fast experience, but the reality kind of kicked in and set in. And that's when I thought to myself, okay, I need to change tact here. A lot of the advice that I was being given is to get into the job market in New Zealand, you've got to have a network. The companies are more inclined to offer people a role where they are being referred by somebody else, preferably somebody in the organization. So I decided, okay, I'm going to do a 2-week stint in New Zealand, a week in Auckland and a week in Christchurch, try and meet up with as many friends and people that I know that are based here, just to try and build a network and try and get some visibility of what I was trying to do with people that I knew. So I planned that. So like you said, in 2017 is when the journey started, and eventually it booked a kind of look-see visit for early 2018. And fortunately for me, I'd already started the networking thing before I arrived in New Zealand. And I'd reached out to colleagues that I'd worked with before in South Africa who I knew were here in New Zealand. And one of my colleagues came back and said that there was a position at a company that she worked for here in Auckland, and would I mind her referring me? So I was like, yes, please. I went for a couple of interviews, and then the look-see visit very quickly had to turn into okay, I need to get ready to move. So I changed all of the plans. I kept all the hotel bookings, but just shifted it out slightly so that it could work with me getting a work visa. Fortunately, everything worked out perfectly. I got the visa. resigned from my job, and started planning to make the move across. My partner and I have 2 children. So the next step was to try and secure their visas, my partnership visa, and my kids' student visas. So that was, I started doing that already while I was in South Africa still, just to make sure that they were all set up to join me after I'd come over to start work. And that's kind of where the first hiccup,
Yes.
well, not the first one, but probably the biggest hiccup was faced. My partner Quibus and I were married for 14 years. And I think it was in 2016, we hit a bit of a rough patch and we actually officially divorced. We ended up reconciling about 2 months after the divorce was final, which was quite something. And while that whole story, telling people around Bri and your friends and everyone finds it quite funny, wasn't that funny for Immigration New Zealand. They were not that amused. And while we'd gathered all of the evidence and provided all of that with his partnership visa, they pretty much came back and said, no, that's not enough. You need to really provide more evidence. And that for me was my first real shocker, because I was like, oh, okay, what does this mean? I've already resigned. If he doesn't get his visa and the kids then don't come, I'm going to have to beg for my job back in South Africa. So you talked me off the ledge there, and we sat down and came up with a plan, try to figure out, okay, what kind of evidence would help support this, and what did we need to do to kind of get New Zealand immigration across the line.
Yeah, convince them.
Yeah, that was quite an interesting learning experience for us, because we then had to get all of our friends and family to put together sort of affidavits to say that this is actually what happened, and that we are together and we're reconciled and we're living together as a family.
When they start querying things like that, then usually it's a downward spiral, and sometimes they don't even actually have to ask anything. They can just decline the visa outright if you're offshore. So the perspective of different, there's a different perspective for folk that are in South Africa. You can obviously get divorced and within a few months you're divorced. In New Zealand, it's not the same. New Zealand, it takes 2 years of being separated before you can formally divorce. So their mindset of a divorce is it's a full and final separation after a long period of going through turmoil or your relationship not working. So yeah, I'm glad that we were able to salvage that as well. But you still kept your cool you kept your cool, and that's why I said you're a cool cat.
And I think the big learning curve for me there is, even though it's my truth, I still have to evidence it. I think going into the process, you know what's true, and you think, oh, well, I'm just going to tell you it's true, and you'll believe it. But it's just understanding the fact that there has to be that sufficient level of evidence to support your case. So arriving here on my next items to do was to try and get as many points as I could behind me to be able to secure residency. So that's when I'd decided I wanted to do a qualification in New Zealand, and applied to do a certificate in business management. Another thing that was quite a strange or learning curve for me around the work visa requirements is that you can't just study. You have to actually apply to, you've got to do a variation on your visa to be able to support your studies, unless, there are other conditions where you can study through your company. But I wanted to obviously do this privately. So that's kind of delayed the whole residency application process. But it was a good thing to understand what you could and couldn't do on your work visa.
So I remember we met up when you were in New Zealand and you started studying as well, and I asked you how it's going with the family, and you still mentioned to me that Quibus is a different person and your kids are enjoying it and adapting very quickly.
Most definitely. I mean, I think my daughter was the one who I was most concerned about, because she was obviously at an age, she was 12 years old and had a lot of friends back in South Africa who she was leaving behind, and she had just sort of kind of come into her own. So she was the hardest one, and within weeks she was a different person. She was just loving the freedom of being able to walk herself to school and do sports in the afternoon and walk home, and she absolutely loved it. And Quibus as well. He comes from an IT background, and he said, look, he wants a complete change of lifestyle when we move here. And I said to him, go for it, do whatever you want to do. And he said, all I want to do is never sit behind a desk again. And he hasn't. He hasn't.
He still hasn't.
He still hasn't. And he is loving, the freedom of being out on the road every day. So it gave him the opportunity to kind of reset and do something completely different that he would never, ever have done in South Africa, never had the opportunity to do. They all really adjusted really, really fast, which was great.
So you managed to get the job offshore while you were still in South Africa. It was pre-COVID days. So that being said, those days, employers weren't that keen on electronic interviews as such. They would be keen on electronic interviews or virtual interviews in some cases where they knew what the person's qualification was, or if they had a reference, I suppose, which is what you had in that case, is you actually had a reference from somebody that you'd previously worked with. So that's fantastic that you managed to get the job pre-COVID and you were already here working towards residence, and then COVID hit and we had a whole lot of lockdowns, and you contacted me, I think it was towards the end of 2020 as well, when you were considering a role change. Talk us through what happened there.
Yeah, so I'd put my expression of interest in for residency early in 2020. It was just before COVID hit. And thank goodness you helped me do that before COVID, because as soon as COVID hit, they pretty much froze everything and they just stopped the whole process. So at the beginning of 2020, one of my ex-colleagues and his wife moved to New Zealand, and she had started reaching out to me from about January 2020 to say that they were really desperately looking for people to fill roles that I performed at a company that she worked for here in Auckland. And I was really happy with where I was, so I just kept sort of bobbing it off and saying no thank you. Around about April, May of 2020, so a few weeks into COVID lockdown, the company that I worked for, the project that I was working on, was slowly sort of coming to its natural end. And I was starting to get a bit nervous about what did that mean. And then there was rumors of potential redundancies because of COVID, as well as the fact that this big project that everybody had kind of been brought into was naturally closing out. So the organization went through a bit of a restructure, and they kind of earmarked a number of roles that were impacted and the number of people that they needed to cut. So fortunately, I was not impacted, but a number of people performing the same job function as I do were impacted. So they needed to get rid of X number of people in my role. And this friend of mine reached out to me again at that point and said, are you sure you're not keen to move? And that's when I reached out to you and said, look, what is the process if I was to change jobs now? How would this work? Are they even doing changes to these visas at this time while COVID was happening? And with your advice, I actually went for an interview and interviewed with them, and they were really keen, and they gave me a job offer. And I think we helped kind of fast track them giving the approval to that visa because of the fact that there were other people who potentially could have been saved from this redundancy process if they now didn't have one extra person.
Yes,
so if I left, there was space for one more person to keep their jobs. So we managed to get that done fairly quickly. I'd gone for the final interview in around about June 2020. I started there in October 2020. So it took a few months to get that sorted. And fortunately for me, the company was willing to wait that length of time for me to get the visa sorted and start there.
Yeah, everything was really up in the air. With immigration at that time, there were very bad responses, if responses at all. But the main thing for us was to make sure that you were secure in a role, because I was obviously seeing a lot of people lose their jobs and not get new job offers. And the new job offer was much better than the old one in the sense that it was a larger company. It gave you an additional pathway to residence. And that opened up the second pathway to residence. And then ultimately, we actually didn't even use either of those. All of a sudden, Plan C popped up, and you were able to, we were able to get you residence from the 2021 one-off residence, which was also something that was just out of the blue.
The 2021 one-off visa was like hitting the lotto. I got really excited. I remember the day it came out in the September, something came out, and I think I phoned you straight away and said, what does this mean for me? Like, I don't think I even read anything. I just saw it and I thought, okay, I don't want to get too excited, but let me just check with you before I get really excited. And when you said to me, no, you meet the criteria, you do qualify, I was like, oh, I can't believe it. It was hitting the visa jackpot there. But
if people, in this day and age talk about, oh, will my residence take 6 months? They've got no idea. We had a year and a half of absolute silence where nothing was happening. And there were a lot of rumors at the time, unfortunately, about changing for the worst, or, sort of having people.
Yes, I mean, that's one of the beauties of having an immigration agent and having somebody skilled and licensed to run this process for me, is that I can close my eyes to all of this noise that's going on, and because it does become quite demoralizing, and you stress yourself out, and you're reading about they're changing all of the rules and they're making it harder, and I'm thinking, so I did have to just switch that all off, and so yes. I needed to take that pause and make that call to just stop reading all the
Facebook groups. Yeah. I know you don't want to say it because you know how much I had to test it, but yes, I know.
Not even just the Facebook groups. I mean, the news. It was stuff in the news that was out there going, this is everything that's going to change, and these are all the new rules, and they're putting a stop to this, and they're putting a stop. And I'm like, I can't function. I need to make sure I stay healthy and strong so that I can get through all of this. So
I'd like to share the image that you sent to me once you did get residence, which I really enjoyed.
Yes, I think I cried a lot while I was putting this together, Dom. It was very emotional for me.
I love it. For those of you who can't read it, it says, give me coffee to change what I can, and wine to accept what I can't, and an immigration agent to tell me the difference. So hopefully that was a good combination of coffee and wine. And with the right results. So love that. I love it. Sandy, so you've been in New Zealand for quite a while as well. I apologize if our internet is interrupted. There's a hell of a storm in Auckland, and we're in Auckland as we can see. Sandy's in Auckland. That's why I've got the picture of Auckland behind me. Is there just something that you'd like to tell people that are either struggling at the moment or thinking about embarking on this journey, something that you've gone through with your family that you've learned and that you'd like to share with others?
Yeah, so, I often think about it like, paying an immigration agent, paying a dentist, right? We can YouTube on our own, and we can figure out how to pull our own tooth. And if I had a choice between whether I'm going to pull my own tooth or I'm going to trust a professional to do it, dentists don't cost, nothing, but that's an investment I'm prepared to make, is for a professional to pull my tooth. And it's the same thing with immigrating. As I said, I'll rather have a professional on my side doing the hard work and helping me through it. So yeah.
Fortunately I don't pull teeth, so I won't be able to help with it.
And the thing is, everyone wants to help, right? So when you are immigrating, there are a lot of people who've been through it before, and like we said earlier on, people generally want to help and give other people advice and guidance, but their information is also outdated, right? So you've got a lot of people who've maybe immigrated, even me, like if people talk to me now, I say to them, and I give your name out all the time to people, And I'm like, I would suggest speaking to an immigration advisor, but I'll tell you about my story and what I went through, but I can't give you any advice or, direction because I'm not up to date with the current regulation and what the requirements are. And so funny enough, like looking back and looking at, what things have cost. And the one thing I can't tell you what I paid for is my immigration fees. I have no idea what I paid you. I can tell you what I paid to get the container across. I can tell you what I paid for the bond on the first rental. I can tell you what I paid for my car. I have no idea. So that in its own is like, well, then it was money well spent, right? It's not like this cost that I'm thinking, oh, that was, and it is also it's that investment, right? So I would much rather come here and drive a shittier car, live in a smaller house, and invest that money into actually securing good advice and getting that security for my family. That was my top priority. So that's where I'm prepared to make the biggest investment. The other thing that I would really recommend is definitely building a network for yourself, getting involved in bigger networks. And there are lots of opportunities here in New Zealand. I actually went to a really interesting a woman's themed networking opportunity where they spoke about public speaking. And just through that opportunity and going to that event, when I was doing my certificate, I recalled this public speaker woman who was at that event. She actually hosted the event, and I needed to put a presentation forward where I had to record myself and present, and I'm so nervous doing stuff like that. So I reached out to her, and she assisted me and helped me, design the presentation and gave me tips and techniques and helped me with the recordings and everything. So even, if it's a personal thing that you're doing or a professional thing that you're doing, or you're doing something for studying, just having that network of people who you can get support from or advice from is really, really important. Just don't give up. Things may get tough. Things may run smoothly and be wonderful, which is great. I wish that everyone's journey is like that. But if it's not, and things do get tough, just think that, the things that you're really most concerned about today, you're not even going to remember in a couple months' time. They will seem like really small problems. All of those big problems that I've had over the couple of years that you've had to talk me off the ledge on, I don't even remember what they are anymore. They're distant memories.
Yeah, you do remember the good times, though. The good times is what sticks with you.
Most definitely. So I remember all of the really exciting things that have happened and all the trips that we've taken and the tiny little home that we moved into and slept on blow-up mattresses and in the cold winter, all in one bedroom, even though it was a 3-bedroom. We were so cold. Those are the fun times and the good times. I don't remember all the stress anymore. So yeah, just hang in there and do what you need to do to make sure it can become a reality and a permanent state, but also just enjoy the moment.
Yeah, that time you can't get back as well. And as you mentioned, those times of sleeping on a blow-up mattress, the whole family in one bedroom, freezing, those are the things that you're going to look back and smile, and really think, wow, we've been through it. We've grown and we've developed, and we had a ball. Actually, at the time, it doesn't feel like the most fabulous thing, but looking back, you actually realize that is something experience that you can't replicate again. Once you're out of the air mattress, you're not easily going to go sleep on an air mattress again. So you've got to go through the motions to get out of it.
And we had a good laugh because when Quibus and the kids arrived, obviously I'd been here a couple of weeks already, and they hadn't quite seen the place that I'd rented. So when they came from the airport, it was late at night, and we drove down, or the taxi dropped us at the top of the driveway, and as they walked down, there was this big mansion at the bottom of the driveway, and they all got excited, but our little tiny house was the the one on the side. I'm like, no, that's not us. And that renting in its own was an experience, right? Because I'd owned a home in South Africa, so I had no references or anyone. So coming here and looking at what the requirements were to actually be able to secure a rental. And when I arrived, the rental market was crazy, right? Things were like there for 2 hours and then they were gone.
Yes.
So I actually had to reach out to my ex-manager in South Africa and say to her, would she mind giving a character reference for me to secure rental? And that's how I ended up getting the rental that we ended up getting. But that, I think I must have gone to about 10 showings for rentals before I managed to find one. That was also a bit of an eye-opener for me. Yeah.
Almost more difficult than getting a job is to get a rental.
Yeah, it was quite difficult. And also you can't quite judge what you can afford when you first arrive, because you don't really know what the cost of living is like, and you don't know. So I was sitting thinking, okay, I'm the only one earning a salary on the side, because Quibus obviously coming, he would have to start looking for a job when he arrived this side. So initially it would just be me working. So what is it going to cost for the kids and for food and just normal living costs? So trying to work out what kind of rental I would be able to afford was tough in its own.
Yes.
But we loved our tiny little house, and we ended up with the best landlords ever. We lived there for 3 years. When I left, the landlord cried, and by that time I was paying less rent than I was when I first moved in. Every year they decreased our rent. So most bizarre thing ever. It was quite crazy. I think she actually said to me she was just so happy that there were people who were looking after the place and reliable and paying the rent. So yeah, it's quite a funny story when I say I actually 3 years later paid, I think it was probably about $100 less than what I paid when I first signed the lease agreement.
If you carried on, I think she would have paid you eventually to stay there. So you should have just carried on.
She actually supported us. So she was one of those that gave evidence for Quibus's relationship with me for our residency visa. And she came over and she said, take a photo with all of us together, because then they can't say that I don't know you guys.
I'm always keen to hear if you didn't have a pathway at all to residence. So in other words, you would have been able to come over to work. Would you still have considered to do that for, let's say, 5 years?
You know what? I'm going to say yes, I would have. And the reason for that is because anything could have happened during those 5 years. Situation could have changed. There could have a pathway could have opened up. I think I would have taken that chance. And what's the worst that could have happened? My family and I could have lived offshore for 5 years, and it would have been a memorable experience for us either way. Yeah.
Yes. Very interesting. I enjoy asking that question to people in the light of what's currently going on in immigration instructions, because that is a real choice that people have to make these days. And I fully agree with you. Anything can change, and immigration rules do change frequently enough. It's a question of whether you're going to risk it. I suppose the risk is knowing that you'd have to possibly leave the country again after 5 years. But if you see it in the positive light that you are seeing it in that it is possibly an adventure, it is an overseas experience for 5 years, something that you can't unexperience, and it's going to develop your kids in ways that you never thought possible.
Oh, definitely. I think we've all changed. We're completely different people to what we were before. Obviously, the kids have grown up, so they probably would have changed either way. But I think for them, the fact that they have freedom and they have opportunities that they would never have had back in South Africa for a number of reasons. One of the biggest things I keep saying is we never lived by the sea before. We have water all around us, which is amazing. And just, I still wake up every day and I'll take a walk outside, or I take the ferry to the office, and I'm like, I can't believe I live here. I can't believe this is my life. I can just get on a ferry. It's not the obvious things like people think, oh, the crime in South Africa and you don't have that to worry about. It's not that. It's all the other things that you gain, the lifestyle change, and just living in a different place, different cultures. And so for me, I think it's opened my family up a lot to kind of accepting a lot more than what they did before. And the fact that they just have this massive amount of freedom, to just go and explore the country. Even back in South Africa, we did very little of that. Whereas since we've arrived here, I mean, we've done so many trips all over New Zealand, the South Island, the North Island, just even if it's a day trip somewhere on a beach, go for a hike, go into the city, go for lunch, those kind of things. We've done so much more of that than we ever did before. So just actually getting out as a family and doing stuff.
Quality time as a family.
Yes, definitely. That's been a big difference in our lifestyle here.
Fabulous. It's so great to hear. Thank you very much, Sandy, for sharing your experience with us. It's really been an honor to help you and the Cronje family to be able to become citizens of this beautiful country. And I really think you are a massive asset to New Zealand. So thank you very much for using our services, but more so thank you for ultimately becoming one of these days New Zealand citizens.
Thanks, Dom.